Hello and happy Friday to everybody. I am super excited to be here with Dr. Vy Simeles, and we are continuing our health series. This is class number 2 as we continue on the topic of digestion. Digestion is really, a lot of people don't realize it is like a second brain in our bodies. It has so much control over our emotions, our performance, everything that we do. And we always think about brain health, but we also need to think about the second brain and its health and how we process our foods, because the food is the fuel for our bodies. And the last class we talked about food intolerances and versus allergies, and how those foods that we intake, even though they're healthy foods, they may not be right for our body type. So it's very important that we really evaluate our bodies, understand how the body works, because we are all different. We all have different backgrounds, we all have different bodies. And when it comes to digestion and food and health, there really, in my opinion, I have not found a one size fits all. It's really get to know your own body. And that's why we have Dr. V here. She has been in practice for over 3 years. I've been working with her personally for over a year now. We've done energy work, we've done food allergies and intolerances. We discuss probiotics versus microbiomes and prebiotics and all of these things that can become overwhelming as we just hear these words just kind of thrown around in society these days. What does it really mean, and what does it mean to us? So I'm going to go ahead and release this to Dr. V. And at the end of the call, we will have some time for some Q&A for the ladies that are here. And feel free, it doesn't necessarily have to be a question on the topic. That Dr. V is here to assist us in all health knowledge. So thank you for coming today, Dr. V, and I'm looking forward to you educating us on more amazing knowledge about our digestive systems.
All right. Thank you, Celeste, for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to be able to sit down and put together some of these presentations. I love educating patients. I know that when we're in the health field, it seems simple to us, but that's not the case for the general public. And as part of my mission to empower patients to take care of themselves, this is really in line with that mission, giving people the knowledge that they need to understand what's going on with their health and some tools that they can use at home to take care of themselves. So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for those of you that are joining us live today. I'm going to start sharing this presentation here. Where did it go? Okay, can everyone see that? I cannot see that. Can you all see the presentation? Because I can't.
No.
Okay.
It's trying to.
Okay. Let's investigate what's going on here. This is just what we were talking about right before we started the recording, which is, gosh, technology.
Oh, we've got a full moon today.
Oh, good times. Okay, let's see.
Which actually, I'm going to take just a moment while V is figuring that out. Something that I learned about full moon and parasites in the body that affect our digestion. I was doing a parasite cleanse, and I had a woman tell me that I should line up my parasite cleanse with the full moon and start taking the products a certain amount of days leading up to the full moon. And she told me that's because the eggs of the parasites hatch on the full moon. And I find the interesting fact that if anyone's ever been in the medical field or police, firefighters, the full moon seems to be like this time when people kind of go a little crazy. There seems to be a lot more activity with things. And I find it interesting that that lines up when parasites would be potentially hatching in our bodies, that people kind of get a little crazy, and going back to that second brain aspect of the digestion. So just something to think about if you're doing a parasite cleanse. to check into how that lines up with the full moon, because a lot of the cleanses don't kill the eggs, they only kill the live parasites. Just a little side note.
Oh, that's a great little tip there. Um, yeah, that's interesting because we do see a lot of difficulties with health around the full moon. Sleep usually is off, people's rhythms get a little bit off during that time. Okay, I think I figured this out. Okay, now can you see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So today's topic is getting to know your gut. What is your microbiome and how do you keep it healthy? So first of all, if I can get to the next page. So a little introduction about me. Celeste already talked a little bit about who I am. My name is Dr. V, pronounced like the letter V. I am a naturopathic doctor and acupuncturist. And I work with a variety of patients, but many of my patients come in with chronic diseases, gut health issues, autoimmune diseases, and chronic pain. And I use a lot of different tools to diagnose and treat these, which include lab testing, and then from that, nutritional counseling, herb supplements, sometimes pharmaceuticals, essential oils, which is partly why I'm here today, acupuncture, energy work, etc. So diving into the gut health, I just wanted to go over the digestive tract really quickly. So it really starts in the mouth. Sometimes we forget about that because we think of it as in our abdomen, like our gut is the stomach and the intestines like that. But really, food starts breaking down in our mouth, and that is part of our digestive system. So when we talk about the microbiome, which we'll explain that in a second here, it really starts here with your oral health. That's why dentists are really important for this whole process. And then all the way down the esophagus into the stomach, lots of different kind of helper organs like the liver, gallbladder, the pancreas, and then what we normally think of as our gut, which is the intestines, the large intestine and the small intestine. Okay. So our gut is made up of a lot of different things. So obviously our own cells, that's what we just went over. But then the microbiome are these other things like the bacteria that are in our gut. Viruses actually exist in our gut, yeast. So things like candida, but other kinds of yeast as well. And something called archaea, we're not really going to talk about those very much. We're mostly focusing on the bacteria because that's the most abundant and probably most helpful part of the microbiome. What does the microbiome do? Some of the functions of the microbiome are to help us digest foods. So not everything that we eat is broken down by our own body. We actually, one of the first things that happens is that the bacteria in our gut or in our mouth help us to break down those foods. So there are some parts of the foods we eat that really depend on the bacteria there to break it down, and then they produce some nutrients that our body then uses. It also protects the microbiome. Actually, some of them kill off pathogens, which are the bad bacteria or the bad things that come in from the outside, and they keep invaders out. And it also actually teaches. So our gut bacteria helps our immune system to develop tolerance or intolerance. So it helps the immune system say, this is okay, this is bad. And there's several ways that the microbiome keeps out unwanted disease-causing bacteria. One of the ways is literally just taking up space. Like if we think of the space in our gut as like chairs in a classroom, if we have the good bacteria sitting in those chairs, then there's not enough space for other bacteria to then come in and start growing. So literally just taking up space. Then some of them actively kill off competing bacteria. So they'll produce some things that will kill off other bacteria that aren't supposed to be there. And then another way, like we talked about, is signaling our immune system. So they'll bring little signals to our immune cells and say, hey, there's this thing in here and it shouldn't be here. So, signals the immune system to take notice and start attacking certain things in the gut. How do we keep the microbiome healthy? So there are a lot of ways that we can do this. One is by eating a variety of foods, and then there are these terms prebiotics and probiotics. So we'll go into that in a second here. So one of the easiest ways to keep our gut healthy is by eating a variety of whole foods. Having a lot of diversity of foods helps to feed different bacteria. So not only vegetables, although this is a picture of vegetables, but also, if your diet includes meat, that feeds different bacteria as well. But most of the bacteria in your gut are gonna be a little happier with vegetables and a variety of vegetables. So some of these vegetables are going to feed nutrients to certain bacteria. Other vegetables are just going to provide a sort of fiber that helps move things through. Prebiotics, we hear a lot about probiotics, which we'll talk about in a second, but prebiotics are also very important. And these are foods with special fibers that specifically feed bacteria. So earlier I talked about how the bacteria in our gut actually break down certain things. So not all of the things that we eat, we can digest. Some of the foods we eat have fibers or certain nutrients that we actually don't do anything with, but that feed the bacteria in our gut. So these are examples like asparagus has a lot of prebiotic, onions, garlic, leeks. So some of these things in this picture here, mostly prebiotics are going to be from plants. Legumes like beans, for instance, have a lot of prebiotics. These are really good for feeding those bacteria. And then probiotics, which we hear so much about in the news. And these are foods like fermented foods, for instance, pickled foods or kimchi, things like that, or supplements that contain the good bacteria. So there is a lot of attention about probiotics, but there is such a thing as too much probiotics. So I see this sometimes when people come in and they have bloating or gas and they're eating great vegetables, or they're being really good about drinking kombucha and eating kimchi and sauerkraut and all the good probiotic things, and maybe they're even taking a probiotic, and they're wondering why their gut doesn't feel so good. Sometimes I do a test that looks at a comprehensive view of what's going on in the gut. So there's a lot of words on this, don't worry about that, but really this is just a little example of how we can look at the actual different bacteria that are in your gut. And you can see here that this compares, this has a scale of how much of each bacteria are in there. And sometimes we can end up with too much of some bacteria. And when that happens, we can start to have digestive issues. The problem with bacteria is that some of them are beneficial to us, but if they are overgrowing, then they are living organisms. They need food. And if there's too much of them, then whatever we're eating isn't enough to feed them. And then they're going to start competing with each other, producing more of those bad types of things. They are going to increase inflammation in our gut. They will start breaking down our gut as well, even the good bacteria, because they're living and they're hungry. And if there's too much of them, they will start eating whatever is around, including our tissues. So that is one of the warnings of, you can overdo probiotics. If you look at the label on probiotics, it's usually people are always advertising how this is billions and billions of this kind of bacteria, because our culture really thinks like more is better. And so, oh, well, this has billions, that's even better than the one that has millions. And actually, we really want to be intentional about the way that we use probiotics. It can lead to a little too much. So I wanted to keep it a little bit shorter. So we're gonna go into some products to consider. One of the things that we can do if we get into that mode where there are too much bacteria in the gut is a product called GX Assist. So this has a bunch of antimicrobial herbs that can help control that overgrowth that we're talking about, or if you come across something that shouldn't be there. So instead of using an antibiotic, it might be appropriate sometimes to use something like this, because these essential oils are really strong. They're very strong antimicrobials, so they can kill off a lot of bacteria in the gut. It is not something I would recommend for regular use. And I would also caution that perhaps you want to talk to a physician, especially someone who is well versed in natural approaches to the gut, to use this, because like I said, it's very strong and it can really wipe out all the bacteria in your gut if you're using it too long or if you're using it inappropriately. So make sure you speak to a physician. And then, I don't always recommend probiotics for people, and oftentimes I recommend people get off of their probiotics. But if you've done something like the GX Assist, and now you need to rebuild your bacteria, this is a really good product, PB Assist Plus. It has both those probiotics that we were talking about and the prebiotics. So it's approaching it from those two different ways, like we are feeding the bacteria that are there and we're also populating bacteria. So that's really good for after either you use an antibiotic, you've used something like GX Assist, or after you've done some sort of cleansing program. Again, this is occasional use only. And sometimes people just have low bacteria in their gut. Maybe they don't eat a lot of vegetables and they need to build it up a little bit. So this is, again, occasional use, and you might want to consult with somebody who can really take a look at what's going on with your body and make sure that it's appropriate for your body. All right. And that really is all. I wanted to give a lot of time for questions and answers. We're going to be doing a lot of different topics about the gut and health. So let me see. How do I stop the share here?
And just in case, if anybody has questions that you don't want on the recording, just let us know and we'll hold those questions off till the end. We'll stop the recording and then you can talk privately with her, so that it's not, this recording will be shared on YouTube, just so you know.
Yes. Any questions about what we covered? Was there something you wanted to go more in detail about around what is in your gut and how to support that?
I'll go ahead and speak. Since I don't have a face on here, nobody can see me. I'm not afraid to ask. But I had C. diff colitis a couple of times. And so it was very difficult to get over. And I had to take a lot of antibiotics to try to get over it. And ever since then, my guts just aren't the same as they used to be. So like it seemed like the stuff you mentioned for prebiotics and probiotics, I can't eat any of those things. I can't eat onions, garlic, asparagus, no, sauerkraut, anything like that. It seems like every time I eat any of those kinds of foods, a gastro doctor said that they convert to a certain kind of sugar, and then it just gives me upset stomach and bad bowel movements and all that stuff. And so I'm just very limited, and I really don't know how to get back to normal. I feel like I've tried so many different things and I don't even know where to start anymore.
Yeah, that's pretty common with people. C. diff I mean, it's named that because it is so difficult to get rid of. And we see that a lot with people who've gone through multiple rounds of antibiotics for whatever reason, that their microbiome becomes out of balance. And this is a case where something like additional testing that I mentioned would be a really good idea, because those symptoms can be attributed to many different factors. Sometimes it is overgrowth of certain bacteria, sometimes it's not enough bacteria, sometimes it's yeast. And in order to have a really comprehensive approach to that, we want to have some data about what is actually going on, especially if you tried a couple of things and it hasn't really worked. You want to get some sort of testing so that you can just take a look and know, instead of guessing and trying things and then having it upset your stomach. I think what your doctor is talking about is FODMAPs. So
Correct.
Yeah. And we often see that with a condition called SIBO, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. What happens with certain infections, or sometimes even with antibiotics, is it actually stops what's called your migrating motor complex from moving things through. And this is, it's called gut motility. So your gut is like a bunch of muscles, and it has to move things through in a coordinated fashion in order to, move food through the intestines in the right direction. And that helps to clean out some of the bacteria that shouldn't be there, or just clean things out from overgrowing, becoming stagnant, or to clean out food and stool even from the gut. And that becomes paralyzed, or it becomes disorganized. So it moves in a disordered fashion, sometimes after an infection or after antibiotic use. And then that leads to a condition called small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, where then you have a lot of bacteria that are going to produce gas, bloating, cramping whenever you eat foods that have high FODMAPs, which is a lot of different foods.
Yeah, all the good stuff.
Yeah, a lot of different foods that you think are good for you, you can't eat when you have SIBO. Yeah, so you want to get some comprehensive testing to figure out, is that what you have? And then you can approach it like, okay, we have to get rid of this, or we have to add in these bacteria, or we have to use these certain herbs versus different kinds of herbs. And it will also investigate whether you have inflammation in your gut, or if there's yeast, because the approach to yeast is different than the approach to bacteria, for instance.
So what kind of a specialist would I see for something like that? It doesn't seem like a regular physician would be somebody who would test for that.
Yeah, most physicians are not going to test for that. Naturopathic doctors are who I would recommend. Most naturopathic doctors have pretty comprehensive education in gut health. And if what you have is SIBO, there are naturopathic doctors who specialize in SIBO. And one of the websites that I often use is called SIBOinfo.com. And it's by a naturopathic physician and has a lot of different details about diets that you can try out, testing that might need to be done, symptoms that are common to people who have SIBO, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a pretty comprehensive website by one of the doctors that are well known in the field for treating SIBO.
Is there a way to find out like a good doctor where I live? I'm in Austin, Texas. I don't know if Celeste knows anybody around here, or if you can recommend anyone.
I don't know a lot of people in Austin, Texas, unfortunately. Since I'm in Portland, I can let Celeste know, and then she can pass on that information to you. I do know, I think 1 or maybe 2 doctors down there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I have had colon cancer, and my gut stays pretty messed up a lot. Most foods that I eat give me gas, indigestion. So I just deal with a lot of things all the time. I had the cancer back in 1997, but my stomach still stays upset all the time.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. I'm glad you've been in remission from that for a long time. But yeah, it does sound like some additional testing and investigation needs to happen into what can best support your colon. This might be a little personal to ask here, but depending on what kind of treatments you had, whether you had surgery or radiation or chemotherapy, different things might have happened to your gut, right? Luckily, the gut is one of the areas of the body that has a lot of cell turnover, which means it can heal a lot faster than other parts of our bodies, because that is what it does. Constantly new cells are being made, etc.
I did have surgery and chemo.
Okay, yeah. So surgery makes it a little more difficult, but not impossible. So there's some things that, some of it you might just have to deal with because parts of your colon might be missing or what have you. So that does make it a little bit more difficult. But I also have patients who have had resection surgery, which is, taking out a piece of your colon, who have completely normal bowel movements and don't have a lot of gut symptoms. So it is possible, even with having had surgery, to have your gut be more on the normal side. So similarly, if you're having a lot of symptoms like that, especially if there's pain and bloating, there's many things that could be going on. Maybe it's digestive enzymes that need to be used in order to support the gut making the right things to break down the foods. Maybe it is the bacteria in the gut, or maybe there's some inflammation there. So if a lot of foods are bothering you, there may be some additional investigation, like, is it food tolerance or allergies? Is it digestive function? Like, are you making the right things to break stuff down, especially if you've had some treatments to your gut? Is it the bacteria balance in there? So there's a lot of questions there about, like, which thing is it, or is it multiple things, and how do we support that? So does that answer your question?
Basically, yes. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, and there is hope. I do have patients who've had colon cancer or other, bowel issues, and they have fairly normal digestive health. Yeah. Any
Thanks.
other questions?
I just wanted to ask, is that microbiome test, is that a breath test? Or is that something else?
So there's a couple of different tests. That comprehensive one that I was talking about, it's a stool test.
Okay.
So we at my clinic were always like, okay, poop in a dish for science. It's kind of gross, but we talk a lot about poop in our clinic because it really is an important part of your health. And yeah, so that's a 1-day stool collection, and they do so many things with it. They try to grow out bacteria on culture dishes so they can see, what grows and what doesn't. They do DNA testing for different strains of bacteria. They look for parasites in the gut. They also see the food breakdown so that they can tell how well you're digesting your foods and breaking things down. So they look for, like, how much fat is left in your stool, how much protein is left in your stool, and then that can give you an idea of what's going on in your health in a very comprehensive way. Usually I start there unless I have a really high suspicion of SIBO. The breath test is not going to give you as comprehensive of an idea. It really is only about, how much of either methane gas or sulfur your gut is producing. So usually that's a secondary step that we take if we suspect somebody has SIBO and they want that kind of testing, then we order a SIBO breath test.
Yeah, I had that test done at the gastro doctor, and it didn't come up with anything. So that's kind of why I was hoping that the test you were talking about was something different. That sounds much more effective and a lot better answers through that one.
Yeah, I think so. I've been using it this entire time I've been practicing, and I've seen a lot of different tests throughout, my schooling and then now in practice. In the SIBO test, the breath test, it's good when you know you have SIBO, and then you want to figure out what type of SIBO you have, and it's a monitoring tool. So if you had really high, if it showed up really high on that test, and then you do a treatment and your symptoms feel better, then you can redo the test and see, okay, did that, decrease the breath test results. But I like this test better for the broad functionality of it. It covers a lot more ground, and it's not always bacterial overgrowth. Sometimes it's just digestive function, or sometimes it's inflammation in the gut, or a parasite even.
Okay, well, thank you. I appreciate the info.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where does H. pylori come from?
So there's a lot of different theories on that. Some people think that is actually inherent in a lot of people's gut, and for some people it causes issues, for some people it doesn't. And I don't know exactly where it comes from. I do suspect probably most people have some amount of H. pylori in their gut, but then some conditions will allow it to grow more and then start causing, H. pylori is something that often causes ulcers. That's when we usually see action on that, is when people are having a lot of acid reflux or ulcers or issues specifically with their stomach. And a lot of the times it's supporting your digestive function. A lot of people are on acid blockers or antacids because we in the general conventional medical community, there's this idea that acid reflux is due to too much stomach acid. But rarely is it the case that it's because of too much stomach acid. In the naturopathic community, that's what we have found, is that when you give someone an acid blocker, stomach acid is there to break down food.
Okay.
It's there to kill off bacteria that aren't supposed to be there. It's our defense mechanism. It also starts the digestive function. It signals our pancreas to release enzymes and our liver gallbladder to release enzymes. So when that is being blocked by medications that we're taking, then the rest of our digestive system doesn't work very well, and it actually fosters an environment for things like H. pylori to really grow and thrive, or SIBO to happen. So oftentimes when people have acid reflux, it's more investigating, sometimes it is H. pylori, and then we have to control that with some antibiotic herbs or pharmaceuticals. But oftentimes with acid reflux, it's more, do you have a food intolerance? That will often cause some reflux. And then the other thing is anxiety and stress, something that we think is completely separate from our physical health, and yet is absolutely related and a part of our physical health. A lot of people who have acid reflux have a lot of anxiety and stress, and that's often held in that diaphragm region, which is where our stomach is. And then it squeezes our stomach and forces food back up. So sometimes we help with some stress reduction, and then physically go in there and help relax the stomach and relax the diaphragm so that it's not being squeezed and pushed up, so that the acid comes back up. Yeah, so there's a lot of interesting things about acid reflux in particular that I could really go on about. Unless you want to know more about that, and maybe we can just have a different webinar about that. We can.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else?
I wanted to add something, V.
Yeah.
You had mentioned in the beginning with your first slide, where the digestion starts is when we're intaking things through our mouth.
Mhm.
And one thing that I heard when I was a kid was we should chew our food 100 times before swallowing, and kind of like, you're supposed to brush your hair 100 times.
Yeah.
So just out of curiosity, a couple times, I literally sat there and I brushed my hair 100 times. I chewed my food 100 times. very extensive. However, what I have learned over the years, I have had major dental work. And so there are periods of time where I really can't chew, but I want certain foods.
Yeah.
And so I'll just kind of, mal them up a little bit and swallow them. And I really haven't done the work with my teeth.
Mm.
And I really didn't think much about it until I started seeing reactions with my gut.
Yeah.
And then when I talked to, and there is a doctor in Austin that I will see if he's still in practice. He's over in Bee Caves. He's the one that started me on my food allergies and intolerances and blood work, live blood work. And one of the things that we found is that I was not chewing my food long enough because of the dental pain. And therefore I wasn't producing all the saliva that is necessary as part of the digestion process. And we don't realize how important our saliva is, that there's a whole role that it plays with the food before it gets into our system. And so now I am considered a slow eater to many. I'll be the last one to finish at dinner, but I'm really taking my time to chew that food and making sure that the saliva is well incorporated with my food and that it's chewed down to very small morsels so that my digestion isn't working as hard. And of course, as you mentioned earlier, there's some enzymes that can be taken to help, if something's a little heavier on the system, because, we get into this winter time and we like things like chili and stew and all those comfort foods. I don't personally intake dairy any longer, but, a lot of people like to go for that mac and cheese dinner and stuff, and that's a really good time to use those enzymes to break down those fats and stuff from meats and dairy specifically, but to really be conscientious of how we chew our food and how much saliva before we swallow.
Yeah, that's a really great point. It really is that the breakdown process starts with just the physical chewing and breaking down the foods into smaller bits, but also that stimulates the saliva, which has digestive enzymes that start breaking down the food. And it starts to signal to the rest of the digestive system, hey, food is about to come, let's start working. And if we are so quickly just getting it into our stomach, then everything else hasn't had a chance to really ramp up the process.
It's like warming the car on a cold morning. You got to get all the fluids going through there properly so the car doesn't, have issues.
That's a great analogy.
Another thought addressing Aisha, I dealt with acid reflux for many, many years. For when I first got into oils, I found that the digestion oil roller, I just carried it with me everywhere. As soon as I started to feel it, I roll a little bit on. And for me personally, I was able to get instant relief. However, I found for different reasons that the acid was being created in my body once I learned about my intolerances and allergies. That played a large role in it, as well as understanding the pH balance and the acidity level in our body. And you mentioned that, we really need to not go extreme in any one direction, because we can actually over pH and we can over acid. And so it's all about balance and meeting in the middle. I personally actually, without the assistance of doctors, was able to heal bleeding ulcers. I don't have the burping and acid reflux any longer because I shifted those food intakes once I learned what was right for my body. And that just kind of all cleared up on its own. And for years, I kept saying, oh, I'm burping because my body's acidic. And I just went with that for a long time until I realized it had a lot to do with the food I was intaking and it wasn't right for me, even though it was healthy and good and I wanted it.
Yeah. Yep. Every one of us has individual tolerance to different things. And if we think about, the evolution of humankind, like different people grew up in, or, are from different regions and had access to different foods. So, like as somebody of Asian descent, I don't do well with dairy. There wasn't a lot of dairy in traditional Asian food. So we don't have the enzymes to really break down dairy very well past childhood. So, just kind of understanding that does play a part into our individual tolerances, which is why sometimes it's like a food that's healthy for someone is not healthy for another person. And if there's nothing wrong with you, if that's the case, it's just our individual differences.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Well, are there any topics that y'all would be interested in learning about for the next couple of seminars here? I'm open to suggestions. I have some ideas.
Oh, one more comment too. I hear a lot of people when I mention probiotics and if that's right for them, I get a lot of feedback with people, oh, I eat my yogurt every day.
Yeah.
And as a person who loves yogurt, again, we also have to take into consideration, is dairy right for your body? V happens to know dairy is not a favorite item for my body. And so I moved over to coconut yogurt and I thought, okay, well, at least I still get the yumminess of my yogurt, only to find out that coconut was a mild intolerance for me. So again, knowing your body and just because something, oh, well, the yogurt has the probiotics or the sauerkraut has make sure it's right for your body. It may not be the right way to get what you're looking for.
And like I said in the presentation, you could be having too much of it. There are people who are like, yeah, well, I do a heap of sauerkraut with every meal, or yeah, I eat my yogurt every single day to get those great probiotics. It's like, it's too much of that type of probiotic. You might need some diversity in your diet, or like you already have enough, slow it down on the probiotics.
Oh, that makes me think of the people that do those carrot diets and they're like, I'm eating all these carrots and I love carrot juice. I love carrots, don't get me wrong, but a full carrot diet. I personally knew one. I just talked to someone again recently that knew somebody that literally turned themselves orange. They turned orange because that's all they were eating was carrots. So again, everything in moderation and what's right for you.
Yeah, we really have a weird culture of like, more is better. If one is good, then let's do 100 of it.
Yes.
Not necessarily.
Well, if you ladies don't have any other questions, we'll go ahead and stop the recording and then we can go privately into thoughts about what you might like to hear for our next class.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.